My name is Mara Collins, and I was 17 the night my family decided the house was worth saving more than I was. The storm warnings had been screaming across every phone in the county for 2 days. Category 4, mandatory evacuation. People were taping windows, dragging lawn chairs inside, stuffing clothes into trash bags, and leaving before the bridges closed. I thought I was leaving too. I had already put my sneakers by the door and packed food for the 2 dogs and the old gray cat who slept under my bed. Then my mother looked at the animals, looked at the packed cars, and said someone had to stay behind because hotels did not take pets, and thieves loved empty houses after storms. I laughed because I thought she was joking. Nobody laughed back. My father carried plywood to my bedroom window and nailed it shut from the outside. When I asked why he was boarding my room after telling everyone else to get in the car, he said it was so I would not get any ideas once the wind got bad. My mother took the last car. My brother got the back seat. My aunt held a cooler full of snacks on her lap. I stood on the porch with 3 terrified animals behind me while my father flipped the main breaker before leaving. The whole house went dark before the storm even arrived. 6 hours later, my phone died. 19 hours later, I was still sitting in the hallway closet with wet towels under the door. One dog shaking against my ribs, the cat clawing my hoodie, and something heavy slamming into the roof so hard I thought the ceiling was coming down. And I smiled. Not because I was brave, not because I was fine. I smiled because, for the first time in my life, I finally understood exactly what I was to them. But before I tell you what happened 9 years later, when my phone exploded with 53 missed calls and my father begged me to stop, tell me this first. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you listening from? I want to know how far this story travels before they realize the truth did not stay buried in that storm. My father's name was Grant Collins, and the worst part about him was not that he was always cruel. It was that he knew exactly when to act kind, so other people would never believe what happened inside our house. He worked for the county maintenance department for almost 20 years, which meant he understood storm warnings better than most people. He knew what a Category 4 hurricane could do to a roof, a window, a power line, a teenager trapped inside a dark house. My mother, Lydia Collins, worked in the front office of an elementary school and volunteered at church every Thanksgiving. People called her patient, generous, and selfless. They said she had a gift for making children feel safe. I used to wonder if I was the only child that gift never reached. My brother Caleb was 2 years younger than me, but somehow he had always been treated like the child my parents had been waiting for. I was the accident they had too young. He was the second chance they were proud to show off. When Caleb got a B in math, my mother taped the test to the refrigerator and said he was trying his best. When I got straight A's, my father barely looked up from his coffee and said, "That is what you are supposed to do." Caleb got new shoes before school started. I got his old backpack when he decided the zipper was annoying. Caleb got a used truck when he turned 16 because, according to my father, a boy needed independence. I walked 3 miles home from school because, according to the same man, walking built discipline. My Aunt Marlene moved into our house when I was 14 after what she called a rough patch. That rough patch lasted years. She never paid rent, never bought groceries, and somehow still had opinions about how selfish I was. She called Caleb sweetheart and called me dramatic. She told my mother I had a difficult face, like I was always accusing someone of something. Maybe I was. Maybe even then I could feel the truth sitting in every room with us, quiet and ugly. The only person who ever made me feel wanted was my grandmother, Nana June Whitaker. She lived about 15 minutes away in an old blue house with white shutters and a porch swing that squeaked every time the wind came off the water. Nana June was the one who came to my school plays. Even when I only had one line, she was the one who taught me how to drive in an empty church parking lot. She was the one who kept my favorite snacks in her pantry because she noticed my mother only bought what Caleb liked. When I was little, I thought Nana was just extra loving. When I got older, I understood she was filling a space my parents had left empty on purpose. She never said my parents hated me. She was too careful for that. But once, when I was 15, she watched my mother forget my birthday dinner because Caleb had a baseball game, and Nana looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "Baby, never beg people to see you when they have trained themselves to look away." I did not understand how important that sentence would become until the storm, because the night they left me behind with the pets was not some shocking change in who they were. It was not a good family making one bad decision under pressure. It was the most honest thing they had ever done. They had spent my whole life showing me that my comfort came last, my fear came last, my safety came last. The hurricane only gave them a chance to prove it when nobody was watching. And when they came back after 19 hours, soaked from the hotel parking lot and irritated that traffic had been bad, my mother did not run to me. She walked past me and asked if the dogs had ruined the floors. My father checked the windows before he checked my face. Caleb complained that the hotel breakfast had been terrible. Aunt Marlene said she had barely slept because the pillows were too hard. I stood in the hallway with my hoodie still scratched from the cat's claws and told them I thought I was going to die. My mother sighed like I had embarrassed her. "Mara, stop being dramatic. The house is still standing." My father said, "You were old enough to handle it." Caleb smirked and said, "Honestly, I would be grateful they trusted you." Aunt Marlene added, "Some girls your age would love that kind of responsibility." That was the moment I stopped trying to make them understand. I had survived a hurricane, but somehow the quiet after they came home felt colder than the storm. For the next year, I became very good at disappearing while still living under their roof. I stopped telling my mother when something hurt. I stopped asking my father for rides. I stopped reacting when Caleb made jokes about me being the family ghost. I learned that silence could be a shield if you wore it long enough. At school, people thought I was focused. Teachers called me mature. Guidance counselors said I had a strong sense of direction. They did not know that direction was just another word for escape. Every scholarship form I filled out felt like a small door opening. Every college website I visited in secret felt like oxygen. I chose schools far enough away that nobody could ask me to come home for dinner, but close enough that Nana June could still visit if she wanted to. I told no one except her. When I finally admitted I was applying to colleges out of town, Nana did not cry or try to talk me out of it. She made tea, set a plate of butter cookies between us, and asked, "How much money do you need to get free?" I almost broke down right there. Not because I was sad, but because nobody had ever asked me that question before. My parents talked about money like I was a cost. Nana talked about it like it was a tool. I got a full scholarship to a university in Raleigh and chose a program connected to disaster planning, insurance compliance, and coastal property risk. People asked why a girl my age wanted to study hurricane codes, evacuation rules, and insurance reports. I told them storms interested me. That was easier than saying I wanted to understand every system that had failed me. I wanted to know what people were legally required to do, morally required to do, and what happened when they ignored both. The day after graduation, I packed one suitcase and one duffel bag. My mother stood in the kitchen scrolling through her phone while I carried my things to Nana's car. She asked if I was sure I was not making a scene. My father asked when I would be back to help clean out the garage. Caleb told me not to act too fancy just because I was going to college. Aunt Marlene said college girls always came back with attitudes. Nana was waiting outside with the engine running and a box of sandwiches on the passenger seat. I remember looking at the house before I got in the car, not with sadness, but with this strange, empty calm. Some people leave home and feel like they are losing a part of themselves. I felt like I was leaving behind a costume that had never fit. College did not heal me overnight. Freedom is not magic. The first time a roommate asked where my family was during Parents' Weekend, I lied and said they were busy. The first time a thunderstorm knocked out power in my dorm, I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes before I could make myself stand up. But slowly I built a life that did not require their approval. I studied harder than anyone around me because I knew exactly what I was running from. I worked part-time in the campus housing office, then interned with a coastal insurance firm, then spent summers reviewing storm damage reports for properties along the coast. I learned how houses failed, how claims were denied, how evacuation plans were written, and how easily people lied when money was involved. Every skill I gained became another lock on the door between me and my family. My parents barely called. When they did, it was because they wanted something small enough to pretend it was not a favor. Could I explain an insurance form? Could I look over a letter from the county? Could I send Caleb money because he had gotten himself into trouble with a car payment? I usually said no. Nana June called every Sunday night. She asked about my classes, my friends, what I was eating, whether I had laughed that week. She visited twice a year and brought homemade pecan bars in a tin box. During one of those visits, when I was 22, she sat in my tiny apartment and told me the truth about the house. My parents had been living in her property for years, paying almost nothing. The old coastal house was hers, not theirs. They had moved in when I was small, because they said they needed help getting on their feet. Then they never left. They treated it like an inheritance they had already received. Nana paid the taxes when they fell behind. Nana covered repairs when they ignored them. Nana kept giving because she thought maybe if they had stability, they would become better parents. Her voice changed when she said that. It got smaller. I was wrong about them, Mara. I told her not to blame herself. She squeezed my hand and said, I do not blame myself for loving my daughter. I blame myself for hoping love would make her kinder. Then she told me something that made my stomach twist. She had changed her will. The house would go to me. I told Nana June not to do it. That was my first reaction, not because I did not want the house, but because I knew exactly what would happen. My mother would say I manipulated an old woman. My father would say I stole from the family. Caleb would talk about fairness as if fairness had ever lived in our house. Aunt Marlene would call me greedy from a bedroom she had never paid for. Nana listened to all of that and nodded like she had already expected every word. Then she said, That house protected people who never protected you. When I am gone, I want it to protect you. I did not have an answer for that. 3 years later, Nana passed away in her sleep after making coffee and feeding the birds on her porch. That detail almost broke me. She had left the world the way she lived in it, quietly taking care of something smaller than herself. I flew back for the funeral and kept my distance from my family. My mother cried loudly at the service, leaning into people's arms, accepting comfort like she had been Nana's devoted daughter every day of her life. My father stood stiff beside her, playing the role of grieving son-in-law. Caleb wore a dark suit and looked bored until someone mentioned the house. Aunt Marlene whispered too loudly that Nana had always been strange about me. I did not respond. I had learned that silence made people nervous when they expected you to beg. The will was read 2 weeks later. I was not in the room with them. My attorney called me afterward, and 10 minutes after that my phone started ringing. My mother called 11 times before leaving a voicemail that began with fake confusion and ended with real rage. My father texted, "Call me now." Caleb sent a long message about how Nana would never want to divide the family, as if the family had not been divided since the day I was born. Aunt Marlene said I had poisoned an elderly woman against her own blood. I read everything, then put my phone face down and went back to work. That was the first time I understood power did not have to be loud. For years they had controlled every story, every room, every rule. Now a piece of paper with Nana's signature had changed the locks on all of it. I could have evicted them immediately. but I did not. That would have made the story too easy for them. They would have cried to the whole town that I threw grieving parents out after a funeral. So I did what my career had trained me to do. I used structure. I used documentation. I used terms they could not twist without exposing themselves. I sent a formal lease agreement at market rent with clear rules about occupancy, property maintenance, payment deadlines, and interference with sale or inspection rights. Only my parents were approved tenants. Aunt Marlene was not listed. Caleb was not listed. No long-term guests without written permission. My mother called it humiliating. My father called it disrespectful. Caleb said making your parents sign a lease was disgusting. Aunt Marlene said Nana would be ashamed. I told them they had 30 days to sign or vacate. They signed on day 28. I still remember staring at their signatures when the copy came back to me. Grant Collins? Lydia Collins. The two people who once left me in the dark now needed my permission to keep sleeping under that roof. For 3 years, I kept everything professional. I did not insult them. I did not visit for holidays. I did not answer emotional texts. Rent was due on the 1st. Late fees applied after the 5th. Maintenance requests had to be submitted in writing. My mother hated that most of all. She wanted phone calls where she could cry, accuse, and rewrite history in real time. I gave her email threads. My father wanted to intimidate me with silence and short commands. I gave him scanned documents. They slowly learned that the version of me they had raised to be quiet had grown into someone who kept records. Then, during the 3rd year, the payments started coming late. First by 3 days, then by 2 weeks. Then 1 month was missing entirely. Around the same time, Caleb suddenly became friendly again. He texted to ask how I was doing. He sent a picture of his new business card from a real estate office and said maybe we should catch up as adults. I knew immediately that something was wrong. Caleb had never reached for me unless someone behind him wanted my hand opened. Caleb's friendliness lasted exactly 4 messages before the real reason slipped through. He said Dad's health had been rough. He said Mom was under stress. He said the house was too much for them, but moving at their age would be devastating. He said he had been thinking, as a real estate professional, that maybe there was a solution that worked for everyone. Whenever someone in my family said everyone, they meant them. I let him keep talking. He told me my parents had gathered about $55,000 by emptying savings, borrowing from church friends, selling my father's fishing boat, and pressuring Caleb to contribute. They wanted to offer it as a down payment to buy the house from me at what he called a family price. The property was worth several times that. The land alone had become valuable because short-term coastal rentals had exploded in that part of the Outer Banks. I asked Caleb what he thought a family price meant. He said it meant not treating people who raised me like strangers. I almost laughed. Raised me was such a generous phrase for what they had done. People raised children by protecting them. My parents had stored me in the house like storm furniture. 6 days later, I drove back to the coast with a folder on the passenger seat and no emotion left for nostalgia. The house looked worse than I expected. Nana's blue paint had faded to a tired gray. One porch railing leaned outward. The storm shutters were rusted at the hinges. The flower beds Nana used to love had turned into weeds and cracked edging stones. They had lived in a house they claimed to treasure and treated it the same way they treated me, useful until it required care. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She smiled too brightly and said I looked thin. My father sat in the living room recliner, older than I remembered, but still wearing that hard expression he used when he wanted everyone to know he was disappointed. Caleb was not supposed to be there, but his truck was parked down the street. I noticed it before they even started talking. My mother offered coffee. My father said we needed to be practical. I stayed standing. They had rehearsed their speech. My mother talked about Nana, about legacy, about how the house should stay in the family. My father said $55,000 was a serious sacrifice. He said I had done well for myself and did not need to squeeze my own parents. He said they had made mistakes, but all parents made mistakes. I let him talk until he ran out of comfortable lies. Then I asked, "Do you remember what you said when you nailed my bedroom window shut before the hurricane?" My mother's face tightened. My father looked toward the hallway, not at me. He said, "We are not doing this again." I said, "I am." My mother snapped that I had held on to that storm for too long. She said I was alive, the house was fine, and normal daughters did not punish their families forever over one bad night. That was when I opened the folder. I told them I was not selling the house to them. Not for $55,000, not for $500,000. I had accepted an offer from a coastal retreat company that planned to renovate the property into a licensed, storm-safe rental home with pet-friendly evacuation resources. They had 60 days to vacate under the lease. My mother's tears came fast, but I knew those tears. They were not grief. They were tools. She asked how I could throw my own parents out. My father's voice went low. He said Nana would be disgusted by me. I told him Nana had known exactly what she was doing. That was when Caleb walked in through the front door wearing his peacemaker face. He said he had come because he hoped we could all discuss this calmly. I asked if he had told them about the offer before I arrived. His face gave me the answer before his mouth did. He had been collecting information for them, pretending to reconnect while reporting every detail back to the people who still believed they could outsmart me. Before I could respond, I heard movement upstairs. Aunt Marlene came down in slippers, holding a mug, her hair wrapped in a towel. She froze when she saw me holding my phone. According to the lease, she should not have been living there. According to the lease, she had been gone for 3 years. I started recording. My mother said, "Do not you dare." I said, "You lived in my house, broke my lease, lied to my face, and still thought I came here unprepared." Aunt Marlene called me a vindictive little girl. Caleb told me to stop escalating. My father said if I went through with this, I would never be welcome in the family again. I looked at the 4 of them standing in Nana's living room and realized they still did not understand. I had not felt welcome in that family since before the storm. I was not losing a place. I was reclaiming one. 10 minutes after I left, my hand started shaking in a hardware store parking lot. Not from regret, from adrenaline. People think revenge feels hot, like anger finally getting a voice. Mine felt cold, precise, almost quiet. I sat there until my breathing slowed, then saw a message from Mr. Jonah Bell, Nana's old neighbor. He had known me since I was a kid and still sent a Christmas card every year with a lighthouse printed on the front. His message said, "Mara, I heard you were in town. There are things you need to know before the board meeting." I called him immediately. What he told me explained why people in town had been looking at me strangely for years. My parents had not just complained about paying rent. They had built an entire story around it. According to them, I had threatened to report them for fake crimes unless they paid me. I had manipulated Nana while she was confused. I was unstable, greedy, and obsessed with punishing my parents. After I accepted the coastal retreat offer, the story changed again. Now I was trying to push them out so I could commit insurance fraud with a rental company. My mother had gone door to door with red eyes and a church voice, telling neighbors she was scared of what I might do next. My father had hinted he knew people on the community permit board who would have concerns. Caleb had been using his new real estate contacts to ask questions about the buyer. Aunt Marlene had apparently told half the neighborhood that I left home because I was too selfish to be part of a family. For a moment, I almost admired the teamwork. They had never protected me with that much energy. I hired attorney Claire Maddox the next morning. She was direct, calm, and completely unimpressed by emotional chaos, which made me trust her immediately. I brought everything: the lease, the payment records, the video of Aunt Marlene coming downstairs in slippers, screenshots from Caleb, the accepted offer, the messages from my father that started arriving after my visit. One of them said, "You think paperwork makes you powerful, but permits can get complicated when the right people ask questions." Another said, "I still know how this county works." Claire read that one twice and said, "Good. He put the threat in writing." She explained that the unauthorized occupant alone was enough to terminate the lease faster than the standard 60 days. Their attempt to interfere with the sale and permit process created another serious issue. Defamation would be harder unless we showed damages, but we did not need to chase every lie. We only needed the cleanest path to remove them and protect the sale. That became the plan. A formal 30-day notice went out citing lease violations, unauthorized occupancy, and interference with the owner's lawful business interests. My mother called 16 times that day. I did not answer. She texted that I was heartless, that I was killing my father with stress, that Nana would never forgive me, that forgiveness was what decent people did. I replied once. Leaving a child alone in a Category 4 hurricane was not a mistake. It was a choice. Lying about that child for 9 years was also a choice. 30 days is more mercy than you gave me. My father did not send guilt. He sent threats. Caleb showed up at my apartment 2 days later without warning. It was almost 8 at night. I opened the door but did not let him in until he said he wanted to talk without them. Curiosity is not forgiveness, but sometimes it is useful. He sat on my couch like he was entering a negotiation and told me he understood why I was angry. That was the first lie. Then he said our parents had made a terrible decision during the storm, but destroying them now would not change it. He said they were older, scared, and financially trapped. He said they needed an apology process, not public humiliation. I asked him what he thought an apology would fix. He said it might give me peace. I told him peace was not the same as letting people keep everything they stole. Caleb leaned forward and said, "You are becoming worse than them." That sentence was supposed to wound me. It did not. I said, "They acted against a child who had no power. I am acting against adults who had 9 years to tell the truth and chose lies instead. That is not the same thing." He said revenge would leave me alone. I told him I had been alone in that family my entire life. The difference now was that I was no longer powerless. He left angry, which meant he had failed. The next day, Mr. Jonah sent me photos of flyers being passed around before the permit meeting. My mother had written that the neighborhood needed to stop a dangerous rental project led by an unethical owner. An unethical owner. That phrase stayed with me all night. They had left me in a storm, cut the power, nailed my window shut, lied to neighbors, violated my lease, and threatened my sale. But I was unethical because I finally had proof. The board meeting was 6 days away. They were bringing rumors. I was bringing receipts. The community permit meeting was held in a low brick building beside the library, the kind of place where every chair squeaked and everyone knew which families had lived in town the longest. My parents had counted on that. They thought history would protect them. They thought people would see my mother crying and my father looking tired and Caleb sitting with his hands folded like the reasonable son, and they would decide I was the problem before I ever opened my mouth. The Coastal Retreat Company presented first. Their plan was clean, legal, and better for the property than anything my parents had done in years. They would restore Nana's house instead of tearing it down. They would add storm-rated windows, pet evacuation kits, emergency lighting, and clear guest safety plans. They had permits, inspections, and insurance lined up. Then public comments began. My mother stood first. She wore a soft blue cardigan and the wounded expression she used whenever she wanted strangers to adopt her version of events. She said I had changed after leaving home. She said I had become obsessed with money. She said I was forcing my elderly parents out of a family home for profit. She said she feared I was involved in insurance fraud and that the board had a duty to protect the neighborhood. My father sat still, jaw tight. Caleb stared at the table. Aunt Marlene nodded like a judge. I let my mother finish every word. Then I stood up and introduced myself as the legal owner of the property. I kept my voice calm because the truth does not need to scream when it has documents. I showed the lease first. I explained that my parents were tenants, not owners. I showed the occupancy clause and the video of Aunt Marlene walking downstairs from the second floor, proving she had been living there without permission. Aunt Marlene whispered something under her breath, but nobody laughed. Then I read my father's text about permits getting complicated when the right people asked questions. One of the board members looked directly at him and asked if he had written that. My father said it was taken out of context. I said, "Then let me provide context." I pulled out the weather report from the night of Hurricane Isabella. Wind speeds, emergency warnings, mandatory evacuation notices, road closures. I told the room I was 17 when my family evacuated without me. I told them my mother took the last car because someone had to watch the house. I told them my father boarded my bedroom window from outside and said it was so I would not get any ideas. I told them he cut the main breaker before leaving, and that I spent 19 hours in a hallway closet with 2 dogs and a cat while the roof shook above me. The room went so quiet I could hear someone's pen stop moving. A board member asked my father if that was true. My father said the storm had not been as bad as people made it sound. The board member asked if he had left a minor child in the house during a mandatory evacuation. My father said I was almost 18. The board member asked if he boarded my window from the outside. He said it was for protection. I said, "Then why did you tell me it was so I would not get any ideas?" He did not answer. That silence did more damage than any speech I could have given. My mother started crying, but this time the room did not move toward her. It moved away. Caleb looked at the floor. Aunt Marlene's face had gone pale. The permit was approved unanimously. Afterward, people who had believed my parents avoided their eyes. Mr. Jonah hugged me outside and said Nana would have been proud. I did not cry until I got back to my car, not because I felt sorry for them, because for the first time, the truth had stood in a room full of people and survived. 6 days later, the 30-day deadline arrived. My parents had spent their last month trying to stop me instead of finding a real place to live. I came with Attorney Claire and a sheriff's deputy because I knew better than to arrive alone. My mother stood in the driveway begging for 2 more weeks. She said the apartment they found was small. She said my father's health was bad. She said I was throwing away family. I said, 30 days was more than you gave me that night. My father walked out without looking at me. Aunt Marlene loaded boxes into a borrowed van. Caleb tried to speak, but I told him there was nothing left for him to translate. The next morning, my phone exploded. 53 missed calls. At 7:30 in the morning, my father texted, "Please stop. Do not do this." At 9:30, my mother wrote, "We were wrong. Please forgive us." Caleb sent paragraphs about how I had gone too far. Aunt Marlene called me cruel. Relatives who had ignored me for years suddenly discovered my number. I sent one group message. When I was 17, my parents left me alone in a Category 4 hurricane with the pets, boarded my window from the outside, cut the power, and came back calling me dramatic. None of you protected me then. Do not lecture me now because they finally met consequences. Nobody replied. The sale closed weeks later. My parents moved into a small apartment 40 minutes inland. My mother lost the neighborhood that once believed her. My father lost the authority he had used to scare people. Caleb lost the version of the story where he was the good son trying to help. Aunt Marlene lost her free room and her favorite hobby, judging me from inside a house she did not own. I used part of the money to start a small emergency fund in Nana June's name, helping shelters stock pet evacuation supplies and helping families with children find safe lodging during hurricane warnings. That mattered to me because the lesson was never just revenge. Children are not property guards. Pets are not excuses. Family is not proven by blood, or last names, or who cries loudest in public. Family is proven by who protects you when leaving you behind would be easier. Some people will say, I should have forgiven them sooner. I think forgiveness without accountability is just permission for the next cruelty. I do not wish them dead. I do not wish them pain for the sake of pain. I only wanted them to live inside the consequences they built for me. 9 years ago, I smiled in the dark because I finally understood I was alone. Now I smile because I am not trapped there anymore.
Our team is working hard to create meaningful and emotionally powerful scripts that connect with viewers. This is a fictional story created for educational purpose, designed to share valuable lessons through dramatic storytelling. This story reminds us that family should be built on protection, respect, and responsibility, not control or neglect. It also teaches that actions have consequences and that choosing to protect yourself from toxic behavior can be an important step toward healing. Through Mara's journey, viewers can reflect on accountability, emotional survival, and the true meaning of family.